Councillors and members of the public, before we commence the meeting, I'd like to draw your attention to the fire regulations which are on the screen behind me and at the side there. Also, please will you make sure that your mobile phones are switched off or to silent. And councillors, can I please remind you to speak directly into your microphones and make sure your card is pushed firmly into the console. Members of the public, I would like to say that as a committee we understand that the matters under consideration tonight can be emotive. Please be respectful of those around you and in the public gallery and the committee and our officers. And now we move on to the main item of business. So the minutes of the meeting which took place on the 10th of February 2016 have been laid on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content that I sign these as a correct record of that meeting? Thank you. Have there been any apologies for absence, Fiona?
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Councillors Mike Band, Jeanette Stennett and Stuart Stennett.
Thank you. And do members have any, have they declared any interests?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest on item 6.4 due to my close proximity to the applicant's site. I will be speaking tonight as a ward councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. In connection with agenda item 6.2, I need to declare that I was present at the Bramley Parish Council planning meeting as a member, though I abstained from the vote that agreed not to object to that item. And for the record, in a similar manner to Councillor Gray, I live in proximity to the application, although not within line of sight of it.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Do members have any other non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interests to declare? Have there been any questions received from members of the public, Fiona?
None, Chairman.
Are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that the committee should be aware of, Elizabeth?
There are none to report this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And in the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of consideration of the applications at this meeting, they will be held on Monday, the 18th of April 2016, at a time to be agreed. So now we move on to the planning applications. And this is item A1, WA 2015 2276. Beggars Roost, 57, Lynnursh Wood, Bramley, GU5, 0EF. Catherine, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The application site is located to the southwest of Lynnursh Wood, which is an established residential road typified by detached dwellings in large single plots. The application site here is currently occupied by a chalet-style property with a detached single garage to the side and rear. Here is the proposed block plan. The application is for the erection of two detached two-storey properties following demolition of the existing buildings on site. Just for your reference, here are the elevations of the existing property on site. And here are the proposed elevations. So in the top line here, this is a rough street scene elevation indicating the adjacent properties on each side and the two proposed dwellings in the middle. As you can see, the dwellings would have a traditional vernacular appearance with barn-hipped roofs and gable features to the front and rear. This is just a slightly larger version of the street scene. Lynnursh Wood is characterised by its verdant roadside frontage, and these are the existing properties, as you can see, large detached properties either side of the two proposed dwellings shown here in the middle. Apologies, these aren't that clear, but here are the proposed floor plans for the two dwellings. So the two dwellings here in the centre with the neighbouring properties in black either side. Typical ground floor layout with living accommodation on the ground floor and bedrooms and bathrooms on the first floor. This is just an illustrative plan to indicate the position of the dwellings relative to neighbouring properties. The faint blue-grey lines shown either side here show the relationship of neighbouring property windows to the proposals. You can see that these lines would clip the rear single-storey elements of these properties, but as I say, it would be the single-storey elements only. The two-storey elements would not impinge those lines. This is just a single photograph to show you the existing property and obviously the screened frontage onto Linish Wood. The application follows a previously refused planning application, WA 2015-1577, for a similar proposal. That application was refused under delegated powers on the basis of the height, bulk and mass of the proposed dwellings and the consequential conflict with Greenbelt policy. By way of comparison, you can see that the scheme now before members has been reduced in both height, going from 8.6 metres to around 7.7 to 7.8 metres. The width of the dwellings has also been reduced from 8.1 to 8.5 down to 7.6 metres, and there is a greater separation proposed to both neighbouring properties and between the two plots proposed. Before we go on to the determining issues, if I can just draw your attention to the printed update sheet, which you should have before you. You'll see that the County Highway Authority has commented on the proposed parking provision, and there would not be room within the site for the vehicles parked on the site to enter and leave in forward gear. Drivers would therefore be required to reverse to and from the site onto Linish Wood. However, the County Highway Authority has not raised an objection to this on the basis of highway safety grounds. You'll see there the officer's comment. We note the advice of the Highway Authority. Given that there would be no technical highway safety ground objection, officers raise no objection in this respect. Whilst it's acknowledged that reversing from the site onto Linish Wood could cause some inconvenience to others, this is likely to be minimal movements owing to the fact that the access would only service two properties and the movements to and from the site would be limited. There is also an additional letter of representation to note, and it is a letter of support summarised there for you. Moving back then to the determining issues, with regards to the matters of principal and technical opinion, the site is within the rural settlement of Bramley, wherein limited infilling can be acceptable, subject to policy RD1. No objection is raised to the proposed development by officers, and we're satisfied that the development would be visually acceptable in relation to the surrounding pattern of development. The planning history that I mentioned earlier in the presentation is a material consideration for members, and you're being asked to consider whether the development, first of all, overcomes the previous reasons for refusal, but also whether it is acceptable in its own right. With regards to flood risk, to the front of the site lies a ditch which comprises part of the former Way and Arun Canal. The Way and Arun Canal Trust has confirmed that it does not intend to recommission the canal channel in the front gardens of Linish Wood, and no objection is therefore raised from them on that basis. In addition, the Environment Agency has raised an objection to the proposal on the basis of the bridging of the ditch and any flood risk. As mentioned, there is no objection with regards to highway safety and capacity. The matters of judgment this evening then are the impact on the Greenbelt and compliance with policy RD1, the impact of the development on visual amenity and the character and appearance of the area, the impact on residential amenity, and the parking space provision. The recommendation is therefore, as set out on the update sheet, that subject to conditions 1 to 15 and informatives 1 to 6 on pages 30 to 36 of the agenda report, that permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. So this is a public speaking item, and I believe the process has been explained. So may I invite the opponent, Ed Simmons, to speak. Good evening, Mr. Simmons. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. So, by way of introduction, I moved into Linish Wood with my wife and young family last February, and we live next door to the proposed development. So, I also represent a number of individuals from Linish Wood who have provided their support and comments to me. And you will have seen the comments in 18 objections to the first application and 20 objections to the second. Note that there was a comment in the report just given that there was 1 support, but no comment about the 20 objections. So, and my argument broadly rests on the point that the revised proposal is not materially different to the first one, which was rejected by the Borough. And the reasons for rejection were threefold. First was around the inappropriate development on green belt land. The second was referred to in the form of the scale, height, bulk, mass and spacing of the development, which we believe still is to be objected to. And the third is that it's in conflict with the Waverley's local plan and the NPPF. I'd also like to note that whilst there was comment on the sight lines from my property and the property on the other side of the development, that reflected sight lines from part of our building which is closest to the boundary, but not sight lines from the kitchen and bedroom which are directly opposite and facing the proposed development. So I'm glad to hear in the report that there is no material flood risk. That is good to hear for us. But we would still like to suggest that you reject this motion on the grounds previously discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. And now may I invite the supporter, excuse me, Amanda, I'm sorry, is it
Hawkswell.
Hawkswell, to speak. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Beggar's Roost is our family home, and the reason for seeking planning permission is to provide much needed and improved family accommodation for ourselves plus 1 new dwelling. The existing house is in a poor condition, badly insulated, and not designed for modern family living. The replacement houses will be built to current building control standards and be far more energy efficient. Planning consent will enable us to remain in Bramley and to raise our 3 children in this village environment. I am a teacher at a local school. My husband works for a renewable energy company based in Guildford, and our 2 girls go to school in Chamonix Green. We're embedded in the local community and love living here. When we bought the house, we only had 2 children, but have now had a 3rd, which means that a 2-bedroom house is no longer large enough for our family. The cost of housing in the area, along with the high cost of moving, mean that we're not able to afford such a family home in Bramley. This development will enable us to build a new house for ourselves, funded by selling one of the houses. In this respect, this is not a commercial development, but is essential to us as a family to enable us to remain in Bramley. Although the existing house is very small, it sits in an unusually large plot, and as the previous owner bought half the neighbouring plot that had originally been intended for a separate dwelling. If permission is granted, Linish Wood will benefit from an extra house, as originally intended, being number 58 Linish Wood. As councillors may be aware, this is a resubmission of a previously refused application, and since that refusal, our architect and planning consultant have made every effort to amend the scheme to overcome the concerns of your officers. We're very pleased to note that this work has paid off and the scheme is now recommended for approval. In summary, the changes made to the scheme design over the previously refused design are as follows. Reduction to the overall height of the dwelling to a maximum height of 7.65 metres, which accords with the height of our neighbours, immediate neighbourly dwelling. Increased separation between the two new dwellings and immediate neighbouring houses. In fact, our existing house, the space that's between our existing house and number 56 is now doubled. Alterations to the elevational treatments to more closely accord with other dwellings in Lynnesh Wood, giving a more traditional appearance. In this respect, the design has been specifically amended to accord with neighbouring properties in Lynnesh Wood and now follows the Surrey vernacular in terms of roof design, window treatment and materials. We will be landscaping the front, including replacement planting to ensure the front appears as green as possible. We believe this scheme will now offer an attractive addition to the road and will not appear out of place when viewed alongside the older properties. No immediate neighbours will be affected by this development, and this development will remove the overlooking we currently experience from our immediate neighbours at Tinsley Cottage, who have a side window looking directly into our bedroom at first floor and living room at ground floor. And just on his point about the kitchen, there's a huge hedge, a very wide hedge dividing our two, so there's not a view to the kitchen. By contrast, the new houses have no windows overlooking the two neighbouring properties and do not extend into the area taken at 45 degrees from any first floor window. Accordingly, your office is to consider there will be no loss of amenity to any neighbour. Just to correct the number of objections, some objections were duplicates and there are only 14 objections from individual dwellings on the site. Some residents are concerned about infill development in the road, and this may be a concern on smaller plots, but we do not believe this is a valid concern on our plot, given that it was originally intended for more than one property. The plot is wide enough to accommodate two houses, and each will have a similar width to many other dwellings in the road. For this reason, your officers have concluded that their report that the spacing would be characteristic of other dwellings nearby. Neither Bramley Parish Council nor Lynnesh Wood Residents Association have objected. The Lynnesh Wood Residents Association recently objected to the Dunsfold development and suggested that, I quote, surely spreading the quota of housing required more evenly across the county and in more accessible, less rural locations is the answer. Our proposal fits with this. We really hope that these factors, together with our personal circumstances, will allow you to support this application and grant planning permission. This will enable us to bring up our family on this lovely road.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hawkswell. And now the debate is opened up to you members. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me start by thanking Mrs. Smitherman for her typically thorough report and Catherine for her very thorough introduction. Most of this I agree with, but there are a couple of factors that where I'd like to add some data to raise questions about the judgment applied and ask colleagues to consider these factors in reaching their own decisions. Firstly, my attention is drawn to the fact that there were a significant number of objections lodged to the application on the Waverley website, against one on the website in favour and a last-minute one. Clearly, local opinion in general is not in favour of the application, though the reasons given are actually more important than the numbers. In terms of impact on visual amenity, I'd like to introduce some numbers with which colleagues can calibrate the judgment applied to this aspect. In the previous application for this site, which was turned down, one of the reasons given was the proposal by reason of scale, height, bulk, mass and spacing of the proposed dwellings would result in an uncharacteristic and cramped form of development which would be harmful to the character and appearance of the surrounding area. So just focusing on the spacing aspect of the proposal, the current evaluation accepts that the plot widths of the two new plots are less than the rest of the street, but it doesn't actually say by how much. Lynnesh Wood was open for development in the 1930s. The original marketing brochure offered plots with widths of 40 to 50 feet, or 12 to 15 metres in modern money. They were purchased as single, 1.5 and double plots, and development which started in the 1930s and continued to within the last 10 years has respected the 12 to 15 metres individual plot size. Taking the widths through the house for each of the 71 plots currently in Lynnesh Wood, the narrowest plot is just under 12 metres in width, and the average is a little over 15 metres, and the largest remaining double plot is actually 26 metres wide. So after division, the land at Beggar's Roost will become two plots, each of around 10 metres width, which is around 15% narrower than the next narrowest plot, and 1/3 of the average width of the plots in Linnishwood. So this I'd consider would have a significant impact on the visual amenity and be out of keeping with the road. But obviously colleagues will make their own judgment on the level of significance given to this fact. Also on the subject of visual amenity, I note that there are no other adjacent houses amongst the 71 properties in Linnishwood that have near identical or near mirror images. Diversity of design is actually a characteristic of the road, and this development, if allowed to go ahead, would actually break that characteristic. The other point I wish to consider is that of the parking provision. I note Highway's requirement for vehicles parked at the new property to be capable of being driven in and out in forward gear has been rescinded. And I actually don't question the appropriateness of this revised position in the context of Linnishwood. But I am a little concerned that Surrey Highways and subsequently officers are not making adequate distinction between requirements and recommendations. So, Chairman, if you'd indulge me in bringing up a general point of process, my understanding is that requirements stem from the law or agreed policy and are enforceable, whereas recommendations are based on experience and good practice and are not enforceable. So in this case, Surrey's perspective was treated as a requirement with resultant conditions up till yesterday, and then it became clear that Waverley's parking requirements make Highway's requirements unachievable. So Highway's requirements became a recommendation and got changed. I repeat that in the context of this application, the new position is acceptable to me, but I would ask if the officers would care to comment on the potential of bringing greater clarity to which of Highway's comments constitute an enforceable requirement and which are unenforceable recommendations. We're actually going to meet this same requirement for forward entrance and egress later in a later application this evening, so I'm left wondering quite how important the requirement is. Moving back from this issue to the specifics of the application, can I propose that if at the conclusion of our discussion we approve the application, then condition 12 should be amended, since that condition relates to the preservation of the forward gear provision after completion of construction. And in addition, I would propose an additional condition on safety grounds, and that is that the curtilages of the two plots are strictly adhered to, with no fencing, hedging, trees or shrubs straying onto the council-owned verge, which separates the plots from the road. While such a condition shouldn't be necessary, it is a fact that some of the properties in Linnishwood have failed to respect this demarcation, making a reinforcement condition appropriate. This condition would ensure that drivers of vehicles leaving either driveway in reverse gear can maintain line of sight up and down the road and thus exit in a safe and controlled manner. So overall, on the grounds of loss of visual amenity, I can't support the officer's recommendations. But if the committee is minded to approve, then I'd like to put forward the two proposed adjustments to the conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seaborn. Officers, would you like to answer the question?
Chairman, if I could come back on the point in respect of the Highway comments, just to be absolutely clear that the Highway Authority are always advising the council in relation to highway matters, giving advice, but they're not actually able to require us or direct us or to do anything other than just offer advice as statutory consultee. So if there is some slight confusion about the difference in wording that we've used, just to be absolutely clear, it's not intended. I think what we're doing is just setting out for members in every respect the advice of the Highway Authority, which we clearly recommend you take into account because they are your statutory consultee and technical advisor on highway matters, but there isn't any difference intended in the wording. I think that's quite an important point. I just wanted to come back on that. I hope that helps, Councillor Seaborn. And Catherine's going to pick up on the point on the condition, I think.
Thank you. I mean, clearly the Highway Authority has a vast panoply of powers to deploy if a development encroaches into the adopted highway. This is advice concerning parking manoeuvres into a private land, and it is advice as such. It's not mandatory on the local planning authority.
So on that point, Catherine's going to come back on the second point, but I believe Councillor Seaborn would like to come back.
So thank you for the clarification. It still concerns me a little that we end up with something that is written into a planning decision as a requirement, and yet it's because the conditions are effectively requirements which have to be complied with. And if it's based on a recommendation, then I struggle to see we're not going back to a point of law or policy. We're going back to an opinion.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you're right that if you grant planning permission subject to a condition, the condition does require the applicant to comply with the condition so as to lawfully implement the planning permission. So from that viewpoint, it is a requirement. But there is a distinction in the requirement on you to apply that condition in the first instance. If you decide that for any reason you don't want to apply the condition, that is your judgment as planning authority. You're not required to apply it. You can make a judgment as to whether you want to apply it. But I come back to the point that they are your consultee, and if they are recommending that you apply it, we normally recommend that you follow that through in order to ensure that the development is safe from a highway viewpoint. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I can understand Councillor Seaborn's confusion. I must admit I'm a bit confused as well, because if we have conditions, do I understand you to say that we don't have to enforce those conditions? I'm sorry, but it's not easy to understand.
Chairman, if I could just clarify. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Councillor Seaborn, so that we accept there is a tension in what we're offering you in terms of advice and the condition that has previously been recommended by the Highway Authority. So condition 12, I agree, in light of the comments of the County Highway Authority, should be removed. With regards to your other condition suggested about encroachment essentially onto land outside the application site, I think Barry's perhaps picked up some of those points for you. As that land falls outside the application site, I don't think it would be reasonable to put a condition on, and it wouldn't be enforceable with regards to additional landscaping in that area. Thank you, Chairman.
Come back, Councillor Seaborn.
Sorry, I raised this point with Mrs. Smitherman this morning, and actually the application site does include the verge. They've taken out the is it a B certificate to do the work on and involve Surrey highways. So the verge is actually included in this planning application.
In that case, then, you could have that control and you could put a condition on to require that landscaping if you so wish.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Seaborn, for bringing that to everybody's attention. It's an important point because we're either going to have it right or we're not. And if we are going to have it right, then it's just as well that we iron these things out at this stage. And so what are you proposing that we have an extra condition in relation to fences, etc., on the verge? Is that what you're proposing?
Well, yes, subject to a colleague being prepared to second the proposal, yes, I'm proposing that there's a requirement that the conditions just reinforce what is already a requirement, that development should not extend outside the curtilage of the property. Because other residents of Linish Wood have trespassed onto the verge, that's all. Just to prevent obstruction of line of sight so that cars can actually safely reverse onto the highway. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for Councillor Seaborne's proposal? Councillor Byam. Thank you very much. And so we have to take out condition 12 then and add in, well, it won't be, everything will move up, won't it? It'll be 15, and the new one. So now I'm advised that I need to ask, does anybody else want to comment on that proposal? No? Councillor Byam.
Just a quick point of clarification. I've lived in Linnishwood now for nearly 39 years. It horrifies me to think it's been that long. Not because of not being like living there, but because I'm getting so damned old. The road was originally a private road. It was adopted by the Highways Authority probably in the mid-60s. The Linnishwood Association at that stage negotiated that the road should be continuous with no pavement and to have a grass verge and to have a tree-lined road with tree planting within the verges. That agreement continues to this day, and the Highways Authority give permission to the Linnishwood Association to plant appropriate trees where necessary, where some are lost. And some have died off. It was cherry trees all the way down for a long period of time, and sadly most of those have died off now. So that condition is there, and I'm concerned in some ways with the Highways Authority not taking any level of interest in terms of that verge, in that there have been requirements for control on how that access roads are tarmacked or whatever, and that continues to be the case. They should require permission. They may well have applied or approached them, but we haven't seen that within the report. So I support the point that we ought to put some level of a control on what happens to that verge.
Thank you, Councillor Byam. So now then, we move on to ask members, are there any last questions? Has anybody else got anything to say on this application before we move on to the recommendation? Councillor Byam.
Sorry, taking a vote on that amendment, which you obviously do, before you come back. Don't need to, that's fine.
Yes, well, we can do. So can we take a vote on the amendment with that is the extra condition that we want to put in about the verges? Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, so now the recommendation...
No, can I...
Councillor Byam.
Sorry, I only brought that point out because I thought you wanted to clear that first before I made a comment. Councillor Seaborne has made a very full comment on the whole thing. I'd just like to go back a little on the history. I mean, the existing the planning listing I queried with the case officer because it states that their outline permission was given in 1951. The properties, this particular property, and a lot of the properties in Linnishwood were built prior to the Second World War in the 36, 38, and the original sales brochure actually is very prescriptive in terms of allowing frontages, as Councillor Seaborne said, of between 40 and 50 feet, and to maintain it. And when we actually did the local plan before it was published in 2002, we actually considered whether this, alongside Monash Park, which is a protected area in terms of its development and splitting, whether we should include, because of its history and because of its nature, to include that. And we decided that because of in the view of the assessing group, it was fully developed, and therefore there wasn't any need to protect it, where in Monash Park there's much larger plots which could be subdivided. Sadly, we were wrong in this particular case. The two owners, adjacent owners to this middle section, bought that plot of land specifically to protect them from overdevelopment and another plot, and we now have a 1.5 plot width site being developed into 2 plots. The residents of Linish Wood, although it's changed dramatically over the years in terms of it, there's still a lot of people there who protect both the outline of the road with regard to separation of dwellings, etc., and the fact that this is one of the original properties, and to my mind is really fully open to be developed in a beautiful way. It is an attractive, very attractive house, and I feel that I still feel that I would rather see that house developed into a larger house if necessary to provide the accommodation, rather than to have it demolished and 2 dwellings. And so I object to the recommendation of approval.
Thank you, Councillor Byam.
Madam Chairman, I appreciate what the local members are saying about this application. I appreciate that there are 20 objections, but as we all know in planning, we don't add up those in favour and those against and assume that the result should be in accordance with what the objections have been. And I also appreciate that the Bramley Parish Council, who've no doubt taken into account all the factors involved in this application, have by a majority decided not to object to this application. And it's a question of judgment, it seems to me, as to whether the size of these 2 properties are such that planning permission should be refused, or whether, as a matter of judgment, they're of a size that are acceptable in the street scene at Linish Wood. I note the information that Councillor Seaborn has given us concerning the plot sizes in Linish Wood, and I would welcome comment from the officers as to whether, so far as they're aware, that is correct. I don't challenge Councillor Seaborn on that, but clearly, bearing in mind the information that Councillor Seaborn has given, and would that in any way affect their judgment as to reducing the size by the amount that it will be, by a percentage that it would be? Would this in any way affect their judgment? I note too that the 2 properties concerned seem to be in front of the building line of the properties in the road, although I see the one on the right has got an extension to the front, and I can't remember what that is, but it's still forward from the what would appear to be the building line of the properties, and whether that is something which should concern us. I also note and assume the applicant is going to be keeping the left-hand property because it's got more garden, and whether the garden size of on the one on the right, because of the, if I might put it this way, kinky dividing thing, whether it's to do with the trees or whether it is just to ensure that the applicant has more garden than the one that they're selling off. I am not totally convinced that this application should be refused, and I'm dithering at the moment. But I think a factor of what, and I know Linish Wood very well for various reasons, as I have lots of friends who live in the road. But I think we don't have precedents, and therefore we can forget precedents in Linish Wood. But I am concerned that if this plot size is materially lower than any other plot in this road, it could change the character of the road if others decided to do the same thing. And I just wonder whether this is something which the officers could comment on.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Would you like to comment on that? Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, Councillor Goodrich. With regards to the first point and Councillor Seaborn's analysis of plot widths in the area, we don't have a similar exercise by which we could offer you a comparison, I'm afraid. We do, however, acknowledge that these would be narrower plots than is the predominant character in the area. As you say yourself, however, it is a matter of judgment against your current planning policies, and it is for you to ascertain whether you think that the harm of having narrower plots outweighs all the other considerations that are before you, being mindful obviously of the council's position with regards to housing land supply and current guidance with regards to design and visual impact. The properties, as you say again, would be sited forward of the immediately adjacent properties. By their very nature, there is variance along Linnishwood. As probably most members know here, there's been an awful lot of development along Linnishwood in recent years, and properties have changed over time. So I do not think that the fact that these plots are narrower perhaps than those immediately around it, and possibly slightly narrower than the smallest plots currently in the road, would lead officers to conclude that they find this development so harmful that it would outweigh the other benefits of the proposal. With regards to the dogleg in the rear garden, again, we don't know the reason for that. Really, it is a question of whether members feel that that amenity space is sufficient for the family's amenity and children's play space, which is the only measure by which you can really assess that rear garden land. I hope that answers your questions, Councillor Goodridge. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Any other comments? Councillor Gray.
Thank you. I'm not familiar with this, and I'm very grateful to Councillor Seaborn's full statistical analysis of the area, because it did come back to a question that I had. What I am concerned about is the comment there that you have a unique style, individual styles within the area, and these are two houses that are identical. Now that would seem to be something that would reduce the visual amenity of the area. I wonder whether officers could comment on that, and whether there should be some attempt to make them look slightly different.
I think there is variation, if you can see perhaps in this elevation. There is variation in terms of elevational treatment, which is common along Linnishwood. Whilst most properties have been built individually, there is a common theme and a common form for most of the dwellings along there, albeit at slightly different variances of that. So we don't feel that these two dwellings in themselves would dilute that diversity to an extent that we feel it would be harmful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Anybody else have anything? Councillor Goodridge.
Can I just say that I don't think they are identical. I mean, they're identical shape, but the treatment of the outside is different. One has got white rendering and what looks like a beam, and the other one is probably tile or bricks. So that they are not totally identical, just as a factual piece of information.
Elizabeth.
And thank you. If I could just add one comment that, of course, if permission is refused for concern about visual impact of this scheme, an inspector looking at this scheme will not form a judgment that on its merit, the size of the plot is significantly smaller than anything else in the street, and that in itself makes it harmful. He will have to go beyond that and ask himself whether, in looking at this scheme in its context, and of course you can only see these two dwellings together within a limited scope of the rest of the street. So as far as that view would be provided, it would sit within its context. Would its design, would its the spacing between the plots cause such harm to the character of the street scene as to warrant refusal? And that's as far as the judgment can go. He can't in principle say, I'm going to refuse this development because the plot size in itself is so much narrower than anything else in the street. You would have to go beyond and actually understand what harm that actually causes, in addition to the point about the two properties being quite similar, albeit not identical. You have to go beyond the principle and ask yourself, well, what harm does that actually cause? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So, are there any other comments or observations anybody wishes to make before we move on to the recommendations? No. Okay. So the recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 15, and remember condition 12 has been removed and an extra condition been put in, so we still have conditions 1 to 15, and informatives 1 to 6 as set out on pages 30 to 36 of the report, that permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant, please?
Seven in favour.
Thank you. And those against?
2 against.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's it. So, therefore, the recommendation to grant is agreed. Thank you.
Crack open the champagne.
So moving on now to the next item, and this is item A2 WA 2015 2229 Park Hatch, Bookhurst Road, Cranley, GU6 7DN. And we have Vicky. Would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The application site, outlined in red, is located on the southern side of Bookhurst Road and to the rear of Little Park Hatch, which is Grade 2 listed, this building here. The site itself narrows quite significantly towards the southern end and is bounded by Yew Tree Cottage to the east and the flats at Haley Place to the west, and the grounds of Parkmead Primary School to the south. The site had previously been used as part of the public house garden, but is now separate from the public house. The site is predominantly open in nature, and with the exception of isolated patches of scrub and some small trees. 2 mature oak trees are located off-site along the western edge of the site, which have recently been made the subject of a tree preservation order. A 3rd oak tree has also been protected under the same order. However, this tree is sited further to the north, further up here, of the site, which is adjacent to the public house. Moving on to the proposed site layout, the applicant seeks permission for the erection of 7 dwellings with access from Bookhurst Road, so from here. 4 of the houses will be semi-detached. That would be plots 1 and 2 and 6 and 7, and the other 3 houses would be terraced, and that would be plots 3, 4 and 5. The mix of the proposed dwellings would be 2 2-bed units, 3 3-bed units and 2 4-bed units. A total of 17 car parking spaces would be provided for the residential development. Additionally, as part of the current proposal, the eastern access point is proposed to be moved a few metres eastwards to form the new access road into the site, providing 9 parking spaces here at the start of the access road, which would be solely dedicated for use by customers of the public house. The new access would run in between the public house to the west and Yew Tree Cottage to the east. So moving on to the proposed plans and elevations for plots 1 and 2. Here they are, so the elevations and the floor plans, which would be 2-storey in height. Here are the proposed elevations and floor plans of the dwellings on plots 3 to 5, which would be 2.5-storey in height with habitable accommodation in the roof space. And here are the proposed elevations and floor plans of the dwellings on plots 6 and 7, which would also be 2.5-storey in height, and again would have habitable accommodation in the roof space. Here we have some photographs of the site. So on the left-hand side, we have the front elevation of the Grade 2 listed public house. And on the right-hand side is Yew Tree Cottage, which is located to the east of the site. Here we have a photo of the flats at Haley Place, which are located to the west of the site. And the photo on the right-hand side is taken from the northern end of the site, looking straight into the site. So moving on to the determining issues, the matters of principle and technical opinion are the principle of development. The site is located within the developed area of Cranley, where development may be considered acceptable subject to its impact on visual and residential amenities. For the purposes of this application, it is considered that the site comprises the curtilage of the public house and would constitute previously developed land. The public house fronting Buckhurst Road is Grade 2 listed, and 2 of the oak trees off-site, adjacent to the western site boundary, have recently been protected by a TPO, and therefore proposals should provide for their long-term retention. The lawful use of the land and the impact on the viability of the public house. The most recent use of the site has been as part of the public house garden, which is now separated from the public house. It is therefore considered that the lawful use of the site is likely to be within Class A4 as a public house. The other consideration would be trees and also highway safety and access. Moving on to the matters of planning judgment, which the councillors are asked to consider, are design and impact on visual amenity. Officers consider the scheme to be unacceptable for the reasons already outlined in the report. The impact on heritage assets. Officers consider that the design and layout of the proposed dwellings and access road and turning head would fail to preserve the character and setting of the adjacent listed building. The impact on residential amenity, parking and noise and disturbance. So without the submission of a noise report, officers consider that the proposal fails to demonstrate that the amenities of future occupiers would not be significantly impacted upon by way of noise and disturbance associated with the adjacent public house. I draw the councillor's attention to the update sheet provided. An additional representation was received following the publication of the agenda, whereby a general observation has been made in relation to the recent TPO placed on the oak trees. The update sheet provides a statement from Surrey County Council Highways Department. The Highway Authority has confirmed they are satisfied that there is sufficient turning space provided within the site to enable larger vehicles, including refuse vehicles, to enter and exit the site in forward gear. The Council's Estate and Valuation Manager was also consulted on the vehicle access crossing a council-owned grass verge. No comments have been received. The recommendation is therefore that permission is refused as set out on pages 68 to 70 of the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So this is a public speaking item. I believe the process has been explained to you. So if I can invite the opponent, Bruce Belton, to... Sorry?
Supporting.
The supporter, I beg your pardon?
Yep, supporting.
The supporter, Bruce Belton, to speak.
Yep.
Good evening, Mr. Belton. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
Thank you. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Bruce Belton. I'm the landlord of the Park Hatch, the pub on whose former land the proposal before you lies. I'm here to speak on support of the application. You'll no doubt be aware that the pub was listed to protect it from demolition following a planning application for many more houses on the site by a large regional developer, Shanley Homes. As a bunch of locals, we stepped in to secure the amenity asset with a vision that by selling some of the excessive and unmanageable garden at the rear for some development, we could raise sufficient funds to be able to refurbish and extend the pub and make it sustainable. This is exactly the same model as I adopted at the Richard Onslow pub in the village, and that's been a success. But taking some of the officers' comments in concern, firstly design. The proposal for the pub and for the land at the rear have been developed after 2 years of consultation with your historic buildings officers and planning officers at different times. This has led to a significant reduction in the scale of the scheme that was originally proposed, resulting in an application that's now before you. The design itself seeks to respect the former agricultural use the pub once had when it was a farmhouse, as recommended by your historic buildings officer. The first proposed two-storey house is set 20 metres back from the back of the pub and is not visible from Buckhurst Road, unlike the 4-storey 1960s block of 60-odd flats sitting 17 metres to the west of the site of the listed building. The proposal for the land at the rear of the pub and the small extension to the pub are mutually interdependent. The pub will not survive without extending it, and this will not happen without the housing development going ahead. Your officers have also expressed concern regarding the potential for threat to off-site trees. This has all been covered now by TPOs, and the expert recommendations are included within our application. Regarding the neighbour amenities, your officers raised concerns regarding noise from the pub affecting residents of the development. The Park Hatch is already a suburban pub. If noise was a concern, it would already be the case, and in any event, noise issues should and would be dealt with by Council Licensing Committee if it was considered to be a problem. In addition, the extension to the pub would reduce our reliance on an uninsulated marquee that we currently have to use. Officers have also surprisingly raised concerns about the financial sustainability of the pub if the development goes ahead. The pub was, and sadly still is, unviable. I've got the books to prove it. Paint has covered up the cracks, but the building needs significant investment and extension of the bar and restaurant to survive. Unfortunately, beer and food cannot pay for this level of investment, and the only way to secure the amenity for the future, as with the Onslow, is to allow this development. To reduce the housing numbers would just render the scheme wholly uneconomic. The pub still enjoys the largest garden of any in the village, which is fine during the periods of fine weather and is indeed very popular. The extension, however, will provide a good-sized restaurant to cope with the winter months and bad weather whilst still having no appreciable impact on the existing pub garden. The scheme proposed not only pays for the extension and further investment into the listed pub, it also provides £200,000 to £300,000 for the council as a ransom strip for crossing that access strip, according to your legal team. The proposal is a fine balance, therefore, between the number of units and generating the needed investment into the public house, while securing employment for the 25 to 35 staff I currently employ in the village who all live within about a mile of the place. So in summary, before you is a small scheme that meets all policy requirements and has been designed after 2 years of consultation with officers. It will provide much-needed capital investment for the pub, secure and enhance local employment for young people, and much-needed homes of the right size, not 5-bedders. It also provides much-needed revenue for the council. Finally, there was 130 letters of objection to the earlier Shanley Home scheme. This is now swung to 5 letters of support with no objections from the parish. If localism is to mean anything, we would ask you to support this application and approve it, and remove the uncertainty associated with long delays that have taken us up past so far and would undoubtedly continue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belton. Over to you, members. Councillor Forachewski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And can I apologise for my late arrival? I was currently having a meeting on site and was late, so I do apologise for that. And before we start, I would like to make a non-pecuniary declaration on this application, as at the time it went to the parish council, I was the chairman of that parish council planning committee, and I also know the owner of the Park Hatch. I've got other comments I would like to make, but I think it's only courteous that the ward member speaks before I do. So if the ward member wishes to do so, then I will come back after. Thank you, Chairman. Otherwise, I'll carry on.
Does the ward member wish... Sorry? Councillor Stennett, not here, so carry on.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to continue. I think this application is a matter of balance and judgment. There are 5 very good reasons for this application to be refused, and they include trees, amenity, noise, disturbance, design, massing, and the public house, the viability of it. But having said that, it's an ideal site. It is demand outweighs the harm. And I think on this particular occasion, given the views of the parish council, knowing the area as well as I do, this is going to provide much needed housing in this particular area that is low density. It's a personal choice as to whether people wish to live in an environment like this, but that's not for this committee to decide. So I think on this occasion, I'm afraid I cannot agree with the officer's recommendation, that I do believe it's a matter of balance and judgment, and in this occasion, the demand does outweigh the harm. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Forachewski. Any other members wishing? Councillor Ellis. Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. No, Councillor Goodrich was before you. Councillor Ellis afterwards.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It is a question of balance, and I think the one thing that we have a problem about is the fact that I'm sure we all wish to ensure that the Little Park Hatch as a pub and as an enterprise will succeed. The practical problems we've got, as I see it, is that there's another planning application, no doubt with a different applicant, to extend the pub, and we're not concerned with that tonight. But it would be helpful, I think, to have a sustainability report. Now, we are told by the publican that he needs the 7 houses in order to build the extension that he wishes to build and to repair the pub and make it a going concern. But we've got no evidence of that, you know, whether 5 would be sufficient or 4 or any other figure. And it seems to me that if, because I am concerned that it's potentially too much on this site, bearing in mind we have a listed building, and therefore buildings in the immediate vicinity of a Grade 2 listed building have to be sympathetic with such a building, and therefore, and I don't think the fact that Haley Place down the road, you know, is barracks looking, that was built probably prior to this property being listed, and in any event is further away. These are very close indeed, and I am concerned as to the traffic movements and so on. But the biggest concern I have when we are told today by the publican that he needs these houses in order to raise sufficient funds to ensure this pub can be a going concern, he may well be right, but I'm not sure I have the evidence to support it. And I would have thought that if that is one of the major reasons for the development, that it would have been a basic bit of information that one would have included in the application. Because I think that is important. So I am minded to adjourn it for such a report to be prepared. And while he's at it, he could do a noise report too, which the officers say would be helpful. Either that or at the moment, on the information I've got at the moment, without a sustainability report and without the other report, I would, at the moment, be minded to follow the officer's recommendation. But I want the pub to succeed, and therefore it's in their interest to ensure they supply the council with the evidence to give us the ammunition to deal with it.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Can I just clear something up here? Because it seems to me that we should be considering this application on its merits as a building project. Should we be taking into account any other reasons? Is this a reasonable thing to be doing? It seems to me that it might be clouding the issue. The application should be judged on its own merits, in my mind. Please put me right.
Chairman, if I may, the issues regarding viability are really twofold in this instance. You have an existing public house which benefits from a large pub garden, which part of our concern is about in severing that garden. Do you affect the future viability of a pub which is proposed to be extended? Will it have the services, so the grounds and the parking and the space around it available to ensure, as Councillor Goodrich has said, it continues to be a going concern and a viable public house? The second point that Councillor Goodrich has raised is about enabling development. This has not been put forward on the basis of it being an enabling development, i.e. development which is necessary in order to support another use or building, i.e. the public house, and preserve its heritage. Those arguments have not been progressed by the applicant. They are open for the applicant to make, But in the absence of them, we express concern that we don't have that information available to enable us to make the conclusion that, first of all, this is not going to compromise the future viability of the public house by severing its garden, and secondly, that this is the minimum amount of development required in order to finance the development of the public house going forward. So there are two strands to our concerns with regards to the lack of viability or sustainability information with regards to this application. I hope that clarifies it for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Goodrich.
Yes, going to come back. I accept exactly everything that our officer has said. But I'm mindful that although enabling development has not been something that was raised in the application, it seems to have been raised from the public gallery by the applicant. And if that is going to be an argument, or should have been an argument, we have two options. We either, in my view, refuse it, and he has to come back and produce an application with all that information, or we adjourn it to enable him to raise that and can see if that affects the officer's views. But it seems to me that as the application is, I mean, there was one mention of sustainability in on page 52 in the middle. It's talking about viability of the pub could be sustained. So I thought that enabling development was something which was being vaguely referred to in the application. But if it hasn't been argued as part of the application, but the applicant is now wishing to raise it as a material matter, then I think we've got to take that into account in some way, either by adjourning it or letting him come back on another application. But, because I appreciate the applicant wants to get on with it, and says it's been festering away for a long time, but if he doesn't supply the information that we as the committee need to know, it does put us at a disadvantage.
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just add to that, I think in this particular instance, it would probably be better for members to make a decision on the application, because there are a number of concerns about outstanding information, and I think while there is some merit in some elements of this proposal, I think our conclusion is it does need to be worked up further to provide the council with satisfactory evidence that it's compliant with your policies. So I think it would be better to make a decision if you agree that in its current form it's unacceptable. It sends a message. There are clear-cut reasons for refusal, but there is certainly merit and scope for the applicant to work on those, to come back with a fully fledged proposal to satisfy the council on its concerns. Just want to pick up on Councillor Elsie's point about should this be regarded on its merits. If this was an application which had no other objections to it, then you could make a decision to say, well, with or without the enabling information, we could make a decision that this is acceptable as a housing scheme. But because the one arm of the viability is that it's encroaching upon land within the pub's area at present, we have this ongoing concern about, even if it hasn't been put forward as an enabling argument, it still concerns us that we're not satisfied that it wouldn't undermine the viability of the pub. So that sets us on the course of thinking we don't have a scheme which is on its merits acceptable, that you could go ahead and consider, in our view, without considering this viability information. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor Goodrich has actually very eloquently said my thoughts, explained my thoughts on this application. I do highly and really commend the owner of this public house for the work that they put in. They changed the whole nature of the public house and made it very acceptable to people in the neighbourhood who previously really didn't visit it. But I do have some concerns regarding the proposal, and those relate really to the parking facilities and the need for visitors to the public house probably actually to go into the development to turn around and come out onto the road again. So I retain concerns about the parking facilities. Really, I feel that this would impinge on the future residents. I know that they would buy those properties or have those properties knowing in the full knowledge of the public house, but I can foresee some problems there in the future. But I do think that I've seen some evidence that proves to me that the viability of the public house is under some threat, and that there is a need for enabling development to take place. I would like to see us, I suppose I'm minded to accept the recommendation of the officers, but I would like to see some message to the applicant that we would like to see a viable alternative suggestion addressing some of the problems, the issues that have been raised in the report. But my feeling is that with a great deal of sadness and some regret, actually on this occasion I will support the officers, but would like to see some application come from the applicants that has more details that I think we need to go ahead with it. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the officers as to why there hasn't been a report of any sort, or even an oral report back from the estates and valuation. And also to make the point back to Councillor Goodrich's comments, and all the time he was speaking I was looking at reason 5 for rejection, which is all about the viability and the sustainability of this. And if officers have concerns, I just question whether we should actually defer this and come back. And is it wrong to do that? But it's definitely in your reasons there about sustainability, and obviously with your statement in there have cooperating with the landlord. I'm a bit puzzled as to why there hasn't been more information provided to you. So first of all, it's the question of why we haven't had estates and valuation officers' response, and secondly, explain why that point has not been covered to your satisfaction.
Chairman, if I could just answer those questions for Councillor Gray. Firstly, with regards to the estates and valuation officer, we have consulted them simply on the access, and that is more as a landowner rather than for any other reason. So they would still obviously retain their control over that access in the way that any other landowner would be consulted as part of a planning application and may choose not to respond. So I apologise, we've not had a response from them, but certainly going forward we would seek their confirmation regarding the access, that they are happy for that to be in that position. With regards to your second question about the information regarding viability, again, we can only assess that which is before us. We cannot take into account the arguments progressed because the application for extensions to the public house are covered under a separate planning application. Therefore, there is no link, so to speak, between that as a development to support the ongoing viability of the public house and the housing development to the rear. If it were a comprehensive planning application, you would have that information, and that would be absolutely a requirement. Having said that, you do have to assess this on the merits before you, and consider whether you think that the loss of this land is harmful, and that is a matter of judgment for you to make. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a great deal of sympathy with the owners of this pub. I look back to 2012 when there were rumours before a proposal came forward that it was to be demolished and new houses built on it. Letters flooded in from all around the country, indeed I believe overseas, from those who had it had been their favourite watering hole during their, shall we say, late teens and early 20s. They all wanted to save it, but not living close to it. There was not a lot they could do. They couldn't beef up the client, the feet behind the bar. I feel that the listing that followed, and it is quite a quaint building, the listing that followed has now made it something of a difficult choice as regards development in which to try and save it. I can understand the officer's concern. My biggest concern really, I look at those 4, 8, I think 9 parking spaces on the access road to this proposed development, and at least 4 of them will need to go into the development in order to turn around and come out on the onto the highway in forward gear. I wonder really, I mean, if they're leaving the pub at a fairly late hour, sometimes I think drivers tend not to be as quiet as they ought to. They're going to disturb residents in this proposed development, and I'm not sure that that is an ideal situation. At the moment, as far as I can see, the officers have it right, and I would support their recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? So then we're ready to go on to the recommendation, which is that subject to reasons 1 to 5, as set out on pages 68 to 70 of the report, permission be refused. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to refuse, please? And those against?
1, 2.
And they're abstaining?
Sorry, I've miscounted. So Councillor Denis? Sorry. You refusal. Thank you. So that was 8 to refuse.
Thank you. So, members, the recommendation to refuse is agreed. And, now we move on to excuse me, item B1, WA 2015-2296. Excuse me. Sorry, garages 1 to 14, Binhamsley, Dunsfold. Tim, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So members, starting off the site location, the site's located here on the northern side of Binhamsley, which is a cul-de-sac road. The road leads off another road called Binham's Meadow, which serves residential properties here, and Binhamsley currently serves residential properties here. The application site currently comprises garages and hard standing, which serve these properties here. The site surroundings consist of the fire station here, school building here, which is Grade 2 listed. The site also adjoins the common, which forms part of the conservation area for Dunsfold, and is a site of nature conservation importance. Here's a comparison between the existing site plan on the left on the screen and the proposed site plan. The application is for a pair of semi-detached 2-storey dwellings, each with 2 bedrooms. The application is made by the housing team within Waverley Borough Council, so the 2 properties would be affordable dwellings. Each dwelling would have 2 parking spaces and rear garden space. The access would be modified to allow easier entry and exit. This is just the site plan again, but taken from further out, where you can see the context of the neighbouring bungalows in Binhamsley, and just gives you an idea on building lines. This is the proposed elevations of the properties. The design would make use of barn hip ends to the roof structure, along with two side subordinate sections. The materials would be clay tile roof, clay tile hanging and facing brickwork at ground level. The front would have bay windows, feature dormer windows, and the access would be to the side. Looking at the rear of the property, you know, the hip roof and then the subordinate side sections. And here again, looking at the side, you can see the entrance to one of the properties. Ground floor plan, really a sort of traditional layout: kitchen, diner, and living room accommodation at the rear. And at first floor, 2 bedrooms and a single bathroom. The application was accompanied with some 3D visual aids just to help show the type of design of property proposed. So here, looking west, looking at the front elevation of the property here, just to help give you an idea of the design. And again, handed looking east of the front elevation again. And from the south, looking at the rear. This is the proposed street scene. There is currently the fire station building here to the left and tower. This is the commencement of the bungalows in Binhamsley, which the site is adjacent to. You note obviously there's a considerable height difference between the properties. However, the properties on Binham's Meadow are 2-storey, and they are pairs of semi-detached properties. I've got site photographs of them, which I'll go into shortly. So looking at site photos, this is the existing entrance to the site. You'll note the garaging and my car there. The proposal includes modifying this access here to make it wider to allow greater entry. This is the existing garages and hard standing on the site. This is the existing bungalows in Binhamsley to the north of the site, so the site is off screen to the left here. And there's the fire station to the left of the site. And the existing dwellings opposite in Binham's Meadow. So the nearest properties opposite the site is this. The site is behind me as I'm taking the photograph. Members will note in the report we have consulted our tree and landscape officer on the position of the proposed properties in relation to an oak tree. This tree here I've labelled here. You'll note there is a conflict between advice from the tree officer and what the application proposes in terms of seeking the retention of the tree. So we have assessed it on its merits, in that we consider that the tree would likely be lost. However, we have put conditions on to try and seek its retention and acknowledge the applicant's intention to retain the tree. This is a view north on Binhamsley, so the site entrance is here. You can't really see the garaging at the moment, but on the left you can see just the fire station building and the bungalows here on Binhamsley. In terms of determining issues with this application, I'll draw attention to the matters of judgment on the right-hand side. The site is within the rural settlement of Dunsfold, where in principle some infill development can be acceptable. The site contains existing garaging and hard standing, and so it is a brownfield site by definition. Visual impact and landscape considerations. We have sought advice from our conservation officer on likely views from the conservation area and listed building north of the site. We are satisfied with the design and scale and height of the buildings that would not be harmful. This, of course, is a judgment. Residential amenity, the buildings would be higher than the existing on-site. However, we're satisfied that the spacing to the bungalows to the east is acceptable. The proposal provides outdoor amenity space for each property. Heritage assets, again, that's the conservation area and greater listed building nearby. And trees is a matter of judgment in this case. And parking, the existing parking information that's been given to officers in the application is that the garaging and hard standing is very underused, and therefore, in principle, the release of the site to housing can be supported. So, Chairman, officers recommend permission be granted as set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. Well, I have to say straight away that unless I hear something that makes me change my mind, I will not be agreeing with the officers. I've never seen such a horrible design, and I think it's will cause huge visual harm. It's an absolute hodgepodge. I can't, unless these drawings don't represent the design properly. But anyway, let's see what everybody else thinks. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your comments. Just a bit of background. Dunsfold has 45 council-owned properties. It has 31 affordable homes. That's a total of 76 in the village of 441. That's 17% of the houses are council and affordable. The council itself is forecasting that 27% of our population is going to be over 65 by the end of our local plan. And what do? We're basically putting up a proposal to put a pair of semi-detached two-storey houses right alongside bungalows. I think the site is quite difficult to basically accommodate these. Very much I noticed the reason one in the previous application because of potential harm to the trees. Yet here we are basically just advising that there is going to be harm to the tree, but we can go ahead with a planning. If we look at the outline on page 87, the sort of landscape look, and I think you had a slide on this one. It's the one that shows the fire station, the tower, the house, and the bungalows. Yes, that's the one. Now that's an interesting landscape, and it's not particularly in keeping with the village. It's not in keeping with the conservation area, which is just on the other side of there, or on the back where you've got a grade 2 school. But if you turn that landscape right round, you're actually looking over a pond, over a green area, along to a tree line, which actually has the oak tree, and the oak tree is screening that site. The oak tree is very important. Earlier this year, there was a petition in the village which raised a number of signatures to basically keep that tree. And from the initial proposal, which was to remove it and replace and replant, the proposal has come through unchanged, basically putting the onus on, well, the tree may be killed in the process, but we'll put a condition in that they've got to replace it and ask our permission. I think that's very weak. I think there's a serious concern that I have for the borough is that planners basically say that bungalows is a bad use of space, especially with the ageing population. I think we ought to have a strategy for older people in our villages especially, and possibly in the urban areas as well. I'm not against building here. We have to do something, and we have to put it in. The actual site is capable of being expanded. There is a hedge line that is being protected within that site. I'm not sure why, but that would actually open up the front and considerably improve the way you could lay that site out. On the basis of development, I'm in favour of development. On the basis of the plan there, I would like it to be sent away to be looked at again. Thank you.
Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you. Councillor Dinas.
I think I can be very brief on this one. Right location, wrong design. And that's it really for me.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich.
Yes, I think I partially agree with what's been said so far. I think if you're looking on page 74 and 75 at plan number 1 and plan number 2, which is the north and the south, the front and the rear elevations, I don't think the council's doing itself a favour, because actually that looks like it's a 3-storey building with a sort of small I think it's a pretty awful drawing, because it does look above the sort of bedroom windows that it goes up again rather than going back. And you get this other sort of carbuncle looking on plan 3 from the rear, where it seems to be another sort of story of something behind it. Now, if you look at the side elevations, you get a better understanding of it. But I am concerned that maybe we're having sort of dual standards here, that if this was not the Borough Council applying and we had this problem with the oak tree, we'd be throwing our arms up in horror, but because it's us, we say, oh well, never mind. If the tree gets affected, we'll put another one in its place. And I think that's... I'm not too happy with this, with dual standards, apparently. Therefore, I agree that I think certainly there should be development on this site. In my village, we've got some garages which I'm all keen to pull down and put some houses up. And the public aren't here, so they don't hear that. Well, I expect they're listening, but never mind. But I think there is a good place to put something in my village, and therefore I can see that these garages are not being used as garages. They're being used, those that are still being used are not being used for cars, therefore there's got to be a development. But I think I'm not happy with the size of the development in this place, and therefore, with regret, I shall probably, subject to what other people say, not go along with the recommendation.
Elizabeth.
Chairman, just to come back on the point about inconsistency and just to reassure the committee, I think in fairness we're not applying a different standard in relation to the tree, but I do appreciate that for particularly long-standing members it must seem perhaps we're taking a slightly different approach to protected trees than perhaps we did in the past, when if the tree officer raised concern about impact on a tree, there was a time when it would be an unequivocal refuse and probably under delegated powers. Under the NPPF, of course, we're in a different world whereby we're required constantly to balance the benefits against the harm of any development. And that includes recognising at times harm will be caused by a development, but that the benefits of the proposal need to be weighed up. And that's effectively what we've done. We do recognise the tree has merit, and it is under some pressure by the development, but the condition is felt in our opinion to mitigate that harm, bearing in mind the benefits of the residential development. That is the approach we would have applied had it been a private sector scheme. So I just wanted to reassure members on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I was surprised that perhaps I hadn't read too much of this, but surprised to hear the strong feelings against it and feel that it would have been an ideal place to have a site visit, because clearly from what's been said by members, it's something that we need to understand better on the ground, and the drawings, as Councillor Goodrich said, are rather strange and uninspiring in the sense that they don't really portray what we believe that should be there. And I'm looking on page 74 on the bottom drawings where it looks to be some windows in the roof. I'm sure that's not supposed to be there. Are they solar panels? Okay, well, there's a range of things that look rather strange, and I think I will support the members who feel that it's wrong, because clearly from the street scene that we've seen and the drawings, it doesn't look as if it fits in any way with what is there already.
Thank you, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a very good initiative to redevelop the garage site, but this is the wrong type of development. I think we could do something much more practical and something much more, yeah. It's a really rubbish design, isn't it? Yeah, I think we could do something much more inventive with the site that we have. Probably get a few more habitations in there as well. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you for letting me coming back. It's really things that have been raised by the councillors. If you go to page 74, the site layout plan, you'll see there's a large section there which is cut out. It's not part of the site. And that's the one I was referring to, which is the momentous shrubs. And I do take the point on the site visit. That's probably as much my fault for not basically asking for one. It was, I think, I viewed it as being a small development for it, but I think it is a case where afterwards I would certainly propose that we defer and have a site visit on this one. If I could have a seconder.
Councillor Henry, then Councillor Byam. Oh, so we had two seconders there for a site visit. Okay, you're ahead of me, but that's okay. Who needs me? Councillor Goodrich.
Can I speak against a site visit? Because the design is what it is. It's a design, and we're all agreed there should be some development. I personally, having a site visit wouldn't make me feel happier about the design of that the architects are proposing on behalf of this council. But you know, if people want one, fair enough. But I'm not quite sure the purpose of deferring and having a site visit, because we're lumbered with the design, even if we have a site visit.
Okay, could we, Councillor Gray, you're happy with what Councillor Goodrich has said?
I understand the point he makes. I do recommend a site visit, right, insofar as I think in looking at an alternative design, but I take the point that it's probably a question of rejecting this one or whatever and coming back.
So you can call for, if this committee is minded to disagree with the officers, then we can call for a site visit at the next application. Do you still wish to speak, Councillor Byam?
Well, that's it. I wasn't suggesting a site visit for this particular application, but in future applications, because of the concerns that have been expressed about the design and the unusual shape and position and the trees, I think that would be a worthwhile consideration next time, but not now.
Absolutely. Are there any other comments? Councillor Ellis.
Sorry, I'm obviously sitting in the wrong place. What I wanted to say very briefly, I was appalled when I first looked at the proposals for the plans, but actually, if you look later, the proposed 3D visual aids, I think that probably gives a better idea, but I still don't feel that it's an appropriate development for this place. The tree is of huge amenity value, and I think we should be fully protecting it and taking into account that it will most likely suffer seriously because of the development. And I'm sorry I can't support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
So, if there are no further comments, we move on then to the recommendation. So the recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 17 and informatives 1 to 14 as set out on pages 97 to 105 of the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant, please?
That's none in favour of granting.
And those against?
That's 9 against granting.
I think that we have no abstentions. That's our number now, isn't it? So the recommendation to grant is not agreed. Thank you very much. Yes, so we thank you, Fiona. We have to now come up with reasons to refuse. I think, have we given you enough reasons to refuse or not?
Chairman, I think in the first instance we would like members to just identify the principal reason, and I think we can put some words around it in the normal way. So if members could identify the key reasons they're unhappy, and then we'll help frame that into a reason for refusal.
So Councillor Goodridge, you want to start us off?
Well, overdevelopment of the site, design and layout, and concern over the likely loss of a valued tree as a start of a 10.
And does anyone else have anything to add to that? Councillor Gray.
I think it's the shape and style and the roof line in relationship to both aspects. The one that comes looking down from Binner's Meadow and the one that looks across from the pond over to the back of the site. I would just caution members when they talk about the height of this. It's very similar to the height of other houses in Binham's Meadow, but it's the way it's particularly put across, I think, there that makes it stand out.
Yes, it's rather brutal, isn't it? It appears to be. Any other comments? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Jim. I didn't hear anybody suggest design, because I don't like the design either, but I would suggest bulk massing. And I think the actual orientation of this proposal on the site does make it, to my mind, look rather awkward. Don't know whether that helps.
So visual amenity is quite coming out quite strongly, isn't it? Is that enough for you, Elizabeth? Or must we work harder?
May I suggest some wording then, Chairman, to pick up those comments? The proposal, by virtue of its orientation within the site, the extent of development, and its height, bulk, scale, form and design, would appear incongruous and out of keeping with the surrounding street scene and the character of the area, contrary to policies RD1, D1, D4 of the Waverley Local Plan and the Dunsfold Village Design Statement and paragraph 17 of the NPPF. Thank you, Chairman. And the tree reason. Yes, a separate tree reason. So that would indicate the concern about the threat to the protected tree by the development. We've put some words around that for you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. Thank you, Elizabeth. I couldn't have put it better myself, and I love the word incongruous. That's a really good one. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we move on to... What have I got to do? Oh, sorry, yes, we've got to vote on that. So, Councillor Goodridge.
I propose we refuse on those grounds.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Gray.
I second that.
Thank you. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. So now the last item on this agenda, and that is item B2, WA 2016 0021, Windy Way, The Common, Cranley, GU6 8SQ. And we have Jennifer. Would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is for the erection of a building to provide 4 flats following demolition of the existing dwelling. So the application site, outlined in red, is located to the south of Guildford Road and the Common. There are neighbouring residential dwellings to the east and west and some office buildings to the south. The site comprises a detached bungalow and a workshop building with a parking area to the front. There is a low hedgerow separating the site from the Common to the north. These are the existing elevations of the bungalow. The dwelling has a maximum height of 6.8 metres. These are the existing floor and roof plans of the bungalow, and the front of the building is at the bottom here. So this is just a photograph of the site to show you what the building looks like. I'm standing at the access point with the parking area in front. This is the proposed block plan. The application, as I said earlier, is seeking the demolition of the existing bungalow and then the erection of a building to provide 4 flats with a mix of 2 two-bed and 2 one-bed flats. The building would be located on the footprint of the existing bungalow at the front and sides, and then would extend to the rear at ground floor level to provide additional accommodation to the ground floor flats. The proposed scheme would include 6 parking spaces in accordance with the parking guidelines, and the bins would be stored within the workshop building here, which forms part of the application site. These are the proposed elevations. The maximum height of the building would be 8.3 metres. The features of the existing bungalow, such as the entrance detail here and the bay windows, would be retained. The elevations would have gables on the front, with a section of flat roof in the middle, which would be set below the ridge and would therefore not be visible from the street scene. These are the proposed floor plans. It's the ground floor on the left here, then the first floor and the roof plan. The roof plan here shows that flat element set down below. The flats would run from front to back in this kind of direction on both sides. So turning to the determining issues, the matters of principal and technical opinion are the principle of development. The site is located within the developed area of Cranley, wherein the principle of development may be considered acceptable subject to the impact on visual and residential amenities. The highway considerations and flooding. The site is located within flood zone 1 and therefore at least risk of flooding. However, the proposed building, there is a brook that runs adjacent to the boundary, but it wouldn't be located any closer to that brook. And therefore, we raise no concerns in that regard. However, we have recommended conditions where the application to be granted to protect that brook. The matters of judgment which councillors are asked to consider this evening are the impact on the adjacent conservation area. Officers raise no concern with regards to the proposed development adjacent to the conservation area and consider the design, form and materials would be in keeping with the area. It is noted that the area is located within the proposed extension to the Cranley Conservation Area, the conservation area, but because that's not been adopted, it affords limited weight at this stage. The impact on visual amenity, the impact on residential amenity, amenity space and bin storage. I refer you to the update sheet. The Council's Waste and Recycling Officer has raised no objection to the siting of the bin store. However, we have recommended an additional informative, as shown on the update sheet, in the event of any permission being granted, to advise the bins should be presented for the collection crew in an appropriate location. And lastly, parking considerations. A swept path analysis diagram has been submitted to support the application, which demonstrates how a vehicle would access and leave each parking space in such a way to enable them to leave the site in a forward-facing gear. The County Highway Authority have been consulted and raised no concern with regard to this parking arrangement. As such, the recommendation for this scheme is that permission be granted, as set out on pages 133 to 137 of the agenda, and to include an additional informative as set out on page 3 of the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jennifer. Members, over to you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I largely support this application. I think the design is good, although one of the joys of Cranley is that there's no specific type of development throughout the village. Lots of the properties are different in many ways, but this one actually, I think, certainly considering it's going to be made into 4 flats, and I think there is a need for this type of accommodation, I think it actually fits in very nicely, and I think the design is quite good. I have one concern, and it's probably me not reading it correctly, but I wonder if the officer would mind explaining to me how this site is accessed. Where is it accessed? Is it from the rear or from the front? Thank you.
Thank you. The site would be accessed from the front off of Guildford Road. So there's an existing access point here, which serves the bungalow, and it would be from there as well. So the cars would come through into that parking area at the front of the building. So it's as existing, sorry.
Could I just check? I think that's common land as managed by Waverley Borough Council. So the fact that it's changing from one bungalow to 4 flats, that wouldn't make any difference.
I think we need some...
I think a consent will be necessary under the Commons Act legislation, which no doubt the applicant has in hand.
Do we know whether the applicant does have that in hand?
Whether that can be made a negative condition.
It may be, Chairman, that we can include that as an informative, but from a planning viewpoint, I think the access arrangements are acceptable. The applicant's ability to achieve access under other legislation could just be a matter of advice, and we could include it as an informative if members so wish.
Members, do we wish to include an extra informative? Do we have anybody who... Yes, Councillor Gray, are you proposing that? Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Ellis. And therefore, are we in agreement with adding an extra informative? Thank you. So, are there any other... Councillor Gray?
It's a point of clarification. On page 110, and again, it's probably my lack of understanding of the site, there appears to be some gates leading down from the buildings on the right-hand side and the proposed flats. What is that? What is it access to? And also, could you confirm what those buildings are? I think I missed that. Apologies when you went through your explanation.
Thank you. Firstly, the buildings. This is it's referred to as a workshop building, but the applicant has confirmed it would be storage ancillary to the residential building or the flats that would go there, and the bin stores would be kept within that, and it is within the red sight line. This is the neighbouring dwelling, and then it's garden area, and then again this is a neighbouring dwelling down here. And then these gates here are low-level gates just that access the rear garden. So there is further, if I refer to the location plan, the gates are there, and they just lead to the rest of the garden space at the rear, which we have, if permission were granted, we've requested additional information in terms of landscaping so that we can control how that would be dealt with.
Thank you. Do I have anyone else on my list? Have I missed anybody? Anybody else want to say anything? No. So we can move on to the recommendation then, which is that subject to conditions 1 to 12 and informatives 1 to 5. Well, that is the additional one. It's 1 to 4 plus an additional informative, as set out on pages 133 to 137 of the report, plus the additional informative as set out on the update sheet. So does that mean we've got 6 informatives now? Yes, 6 informatives now. Okay, so members, we now have conditions 1 to 4. We've got an extra one that we've added, and we've got one on the update sheet. So we have 1 to 6. Okay, so subject to that, do we agree that permission be granted? May I have a show of hands?
All in favour.
That's unanimous then. So thank you, members. The recommendation to grant is agreed. So there are no items to consider in exempt. Have we got another one? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm obviously getting tired. 139. How did I miss that? I'll run out. Did I turn 2 pages over. Yeah. Sorry, I turned 2 pages over. I beg your pardon. So now this is item B3, Chewsley Farm, Chewsley Lane, Godalming, GU7 1UG. Tim, would you introduce the application to us, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, the application before you is for erection of a 2-storey building to provide office space, training facility and education facility within the Chewsley Farm complex. The site here, outlined in red, they've actually put the outline of the proposed building within the red line. You see outlined in blue is the remaining farm holding, which obviously goes off-site as well, off-plan, sorry. The proposed position of the proposed building would be here, set within the grounds of the farm complex. To the north here, you'll see the current staff accommodation. Opposite here are some larger farm buildings, and over here are some residential cottages. This is just a closer up view of the proposed site plan. In terms of the building itself, the building would be constructed of a seam zinc roof with timber cladding, steel posts and aluminium framed windows. This is the southwest elevation of the building. The main access to the building would be here. The building would have 2 floors, including an external balcony with external staircase access to that. This is the northeast elevation. Again, the elevation here would be timber cladding. This is the southeast elevation of the building, so that's where the proposed balcony is. You can see the external staircase there. You'll note the roof form is of the simple semicircular shape. And again, the other side elevation facing northwest. In terms of the proposed ground floor plan, entrance to the building would be on this side. This floor would provide office facilities for the existing employees on site. So the main office facility would be here. There's a small office room here and some welfare facilities for the employees. First floor level, there's a large open room here which would be used as the training facility room for the existing employees on site, but also when school visit the farm as part of their schools programme, this is where they would have it as a education centre for when the children can have presentations on the farm complex. In terms of some street scene drawings, the building position is such that it wouldn't be visible from the main road that serves the site. However, this is taken from within the site itself. This is looking north within the site, so over here is the main road. It will be viewed in the context of other large agricultural buildings on the site. And again here, this is the elevation with the balcony on, looking across west. This image was provided as part of the design access statement, really just to help give you an idea of the type of materials and overall design of the proposed building. So you'll note the roof structure and the posts and the wooden cladding, but that's really just to help you give you an idea of the design. Here's some site photographs. This is the proposed area for the building. It is currently an access route to the fields beyond. However, there is another main access route that goes to these fields as well to the left-hand side of this hedgerow. So access to the wider parts of the farm would remain. This is the existing farm buildings opposite the site. and this is a view taken further back within the site. You have the existing farm buildings here, and my first photograph I showed you was taken here looking at the back of this car, so the building would sit here. There's the existing access road that would be unaffected by the scheme. And this is taken further back now, viewing north, so the main entrance elevation would be here, beyond the informal football pitch for the employees. So members, in terms of determining issues for this application, in terms of matters of judgment, the site is within the green belt. Officers have concluded that, for the reasons set out in the report, that it is deemed to be a form of inappropriate development in the green belt. However, we consider there are very special circumstances in this case that outweigh this. We have, as part of the application process, we have consulted our agricultural consultants for their advice on agricultural need for the building, taking into account the farm and its commercial operation. In consultation with them, we're satisfied that the building is of a reasonable, the required facility is reasonable and design is appropriate. Visual amenity and the area of great landscape value, we're satisfied that the position of the building on site would be seen in the round with the existing farm holding and buildings. There are no residential properties that would be impacted upon by the proposal, and the parking provision remains as is. The building would largely serve existing employees on site, albeit with the educational use when schools visit as part of the schools programme. We're satisfied that there is no additional parking need for this particular building. So in conclusion, officers recommend permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. And I find that the Parish Council remarks quite interesting reading. But anyway, now we go on to debate this matter. And who would like to speak? Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, notwithstanding, I mean, as you say, the comments from the Parish Council are interesting. But I think overall, I think we should be supporting this very enterprising enterprise. They've had a rough ride to begin with to get started in terms of being accepted within the community. I think they are now well accepted. They do a good job and they're going very well. It's quite a busy site. You go into there and it doesn't quite show from the way that you've shown it on the screen. Councillor Seaborn and ourselves actually visited the site a few days ago to go and talk to the owner, not about this particular application but other things, because we were concerned about various things. We're not concerned, but needed to address other things, and did discuss this particular application. So I'm fully supportive of the application, but I have a concern about one of the conditions, and I forget which number the condition is now, because I didn't write that down on my rewrite, but there's condition number 4 on page 163, and I think the condition is a little too restrictive, and I would like to see it relaxed. I had two proposals really: either to remove the condition on the basis that it's probably unnecessary, the company will be running their business to the best of their ability. They do school visits. The school visits are over a very short span of time, because that's the way the schools seem to work, and the farm business with family members actually involved in working with the children. It seems restricted to say 12 school visits a year, because that's what they have. I think it should be open much more. I mean, that period, I believe, is over a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. What happens for the rest of the year? The farm owner is actually a governor of Robborough School, close by, and is himself interested in actually working with Robborough and their place, which is secondary school children as opposed to primary, to have occasional visits or whatever, educational visits there, and the use of the building for that reason. I have one other area of interest, and I've expressed this at some stage during the development of Milford Hospital site on what is now Leithfield or Leithfield Estate. We've got 120 houses in total with the existing houses and all the new houses, but there is absolutely no community facility, nowhere for any of those people to meet as a group, as a residents' association or whatever. And I expressed concern about that during the planning process for that and didn't get anywhere because nobody came forward with any buildings. We broached this subject with Mr. Hall, and he was receptive to the idea that at some stage this building, the upper floor area, could be used for informal residents' meetings or whatever. And I think that would be a tremendous benefit to the community. It would create cohesion between the community locally and the farm business there, because all the pickers, of course, are actually overseas nationals coming in for the picking season, etc. So I've created a revised condition which I'd like to be seen to be considered. And so the building hereby permitted shall not be used other than for the purposes of staff training and offices ancillary to the primary agricultural use of Chewsley Farm, and for educational purposes in connection with the primary agricultural use. The educational use of the building shall be for a maximum of 50 children at any single visit. The building can also be used for community meetings by local residents by prior arrangement and at the discretion and agreement of the owners. And the remainder of that condition stays the same. So I feel that's a reasonable alternative. Say Mr. Hall was receptive to that completely, and I think it's a worthwhile. First of all, the educational side, which I'm fully supportive of, and he clearly did not understand that condition being applied, and he would like to be able to have the freedom to do a little more than what is now happening there, and the use of the premises for occasional residential meetings, etc., would be seen to be extremely worthwhile. The whole of Busbridge has no public buildings whatsoever. Busbridge parish.
I think that you've made that quite clear, and that's a very good point to make, that it could be used for community use. Now, we have a suggestion then that the condition number 4 is changed. Elizabeth, you want to talk about that?
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened very carefully to Councillor Byham's suggestion. I suppose my main concern is that what that amendment would do is effectively change the basis of the application. And it may well be that that is acceptable to the council, but it's not the basis upon which the application's been made or indeed publicised and consulted upon. And my concern is that it could end up as agreeing a permission with a latitude for use for which there's been no community consultation, and whilst you may get a sense that that is a popular thing locally to use it as a community building, that's not been the basis of the application, and it's not been how we've advertised it. So my recommendation, I don't know whether Barry's got a view on it, would be to be very cautious about at this stage incorporating another use in that way, in this way. And I would have thought, inconvenient as it is to the applicant, probably the best thing he could do is go with what he's got here at the moment and then apply subsequently to vary the condition under section 73 to incorporate other uses with a different set of circumstances. Now, that would be another application, but it wouldn't necessarily be that complicated to put together, but it would allow that proposal to go through the proper publicity channels and for it to be transparent. Anyone who might have a view about it being used for community purposes would have a view to comment on that, and you'd be seen to be making a more transparent evaluation of that, and that would be my response.
Following due process, Madam Chairman, correctly as Elizabeth explained about.
Thank you. Councillor Goodrich.
Yeah, there were two amendments in effect that Councillor Byham was making. One was removing the number of visits, so it's not limited to 12, and then the community use. The advice we've had from the officers I agree with entirely so far as the community use is concerned. But does the application talk about limiting to 12 school visits? Because if it is, then the condition is appropriate. If it's something that we've dreamt up as Waverley Planning Department, then perhaps I would be keen to remove that, and then you don't really need condition 5, because the point of condition 5 is to keep a logbook of which visits there are, and to ensure they don't go to 13. So I would ask the officers whether or not it would cause a furore to remove the limited to 12 visits. And if it's not part of the application and therefore it's not something that would cause the technical difficulties that our officers explained to us, then I'd remove the 12 and I'd remove condition 5.
So, thank you.
If I may just respond on that point raised by Councillor Goodrich. The applicants have given us details of the number of school visits that they have, and the maximum number that they currently have is 12. So that is the basis upon which we have made that recommendation. The concerns of officers is that if there is no restriction on the use, then it becomes effectively an unfettered use, and part of the very special circumstances presented to make this acceptable in Greenbelt terms are primarily related to the agricultural and educational use of the building, with the school use being an ancillary element to that. So it would shift the balance of considerations if it were to be an unfettered and uncontrolled use of that building for educational purposes. What you would effectively be saying is that that building could be used 365 days a year solely for a educational use, and obviously there would be implications as a result of that. So that is the reason for the imposition of that condition. The flexibility of that condition is obviously a matter that we'd have to consider as and when the need for its flexibility arises, and we'd have to take a judgment as to whether we consider there has been a material deviation from that condition should that number of 12 visits a year be exceeded in any case. Again, it is open to the applicant at a later date, should their schools programme expand, for them to come back with a revised figure which would be subject to the assessment by council. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Goodrich.
Yeah, valid point, and I take the point. I must say, when I looked at this application, I was thinking, what's all this educational stuff? Because I hadn't appreciated that educational visits were happening. I thought it was a pure fruit farm, and so when I was looking at the size of the barn and was looking at the 36 sort of desks around the place, I was concerned till I read the council's agricultural consultants that make it clear that in effect that educational space is needed for training, and as they don't need it for training for 365 days of the year, they might as well use it for something else. And educational visits seem to be a good way of doing it, as long as it doesn't get out of hand. I just wonder whether, if they've got 12 visits at the moment, whether one should just give them a little leeway and maybe move the 12 to 20. I agree with you that to have it totally removed, for the reasons you outlined, is a good point. But they haven't applied for 12. They've just said, at the moment, we have 12. And I just wonder whether, and I'd ask the officers' views as to whether we could give them a little extra, and 20 comes to mind because it's a round figure, in case they expand it a bit. But it just seems to me they've only got to have one more school say, I'd like to come on one of these visits, and we're up to 13, and then they've got a problem and they've got to come back. And I just wonder whether that would be sensible.
Chairman, I wonder just to pick up on that point, to include slightly more flexibility, would be to include the phraseology 12 school visits per calendar year and maximum 50 children for any single visit, unless otherwise first agreed in writing by the local planning authority. And that would then give officers the opportunity to grant on your behalf, on a discretionary basis, a slight deviation from that on a case-by-case basis. If the farm came forward to say, in this particular year, we've already had 12. We're getting near the end of the year. We'd like another one. Is that acceptable? That would allow them to work with us to ensure if they needed to vary the terms. There could be quite an easy dialogue going on, but it would remain within your control to actually ensure that they weren't exceeding the restrictions materially. And that, of course, is not an unusual provision. That is with this type of condition fairly common phraseology, but it would allow you to have that flexibility, or allow Tuesley Farm to have that flexibility if you so wish them to have that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm very mindful of the time. We're now an hour over our time. Councillor Byam, I am coming to you, but I just would like any further remarks to be as succinct and precise as possible. So Councillor Byam, then Councillor Denis. I don't want to stop anybody from speaking, but I do want us to smarten it up a bit if we can. Thank you.
The term that comes to mind is all makes work for the working man to do, and in this case the planning department. They haven't got very much to do, so they need to have lists to assess and to give more permissions and ask for more applications, etc. I think it should be, the suggestion of 20 is an interesting one. Why 20? Because it's a round figure. Why not 50? I think we should expand it. I don't see any reason whatsoever why we should fetter this company with doing that. I'm sure they're not making any money out of this. They're providing a service to our community, our schools community, and I think we should continue to and encourage that to do. In terms of vehicle movements or whatever you might have there, in comparison to the large articulated vehicles that actually attend this site, the gate sizes are phenomenal there, and all sorts of different vehicles. I think we're just being too controlling. Unnecessarily controlling. There are cases where we do need to control. I think this one could reasonably be relaxed and give you more ability to get on with the other things in life rather than counting the number of buses or children that come to a farm.
Thank you, Councillor Byam. Now, Councillor Denis, is it about this particular thing that you need to speak? Because if it is...
No, it's more about an observation as somebody who doesn't know the site at all. We were looking at the photographs, and the photographs are just virtually black because I think your quality of your camera, and it's very difficult to make a judgment on the use of a site where some of the pictures we've been shown are very, very difficult to see the detail.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Denis. That is a very good point, and we do get, we did suggest some time ago that we got a new camera. Perhaps we did get a new camera, and we're still having problems with taking our photographs. But I think that's something else. I think what I'd like to come back to, and it's an important point. So can we try and improve our photographs and deal with that one? But going back to Councillor Byam's point, and I see Councillor Seaborn wants to speak, is it about this condition and the alteration of this condition?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Yeah, precisely. I'm in agreement with both Councillor Goodrich and Councillor Byam. We discussed this beforehand, and actually I was in favour of having some measure of restriction, but at a significantly larger level than it currently exists. The reality is that the 12 trips that happen at the moment all happen in one fell swoop. So, should schools want to adjust when they visit, there's going to be no capacity for that. So I would suggest a number being put on this, but a number somewhat larger than 12. 20 would probably work in the short term, but as a compromise, yes.
Can I compromise and suggest 20 and give the officers the right to go above that if the need should arise, so that at least we can deal with 20, and if they want 21, they're going to have to put the case to the officers. It relieves the officers of dealing with 8 applications, and after that they're going to have to go to the officers. I think that's a compromise. I wouldn't be happy with 50. That's just too many, but 20 in my book would be all right.
Okay, good point. So now we need to, we have a proposer that you're proposing and a seconder, lots of seconders, Councillor Seaborn. And so we want to change that number from 12 to 20. Is that agreed? So with the proviso that above 20, they can speak to the planners. Okay, good. So, any other comments? Short, to the point comments. Councillor Henry.
Extremely short. It's a wonderful initiative and I'm hugely supportive of it.
Very good. Thank you very much. So now we go on to the recommendation, and this really is the last one for you, not for us. So the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 5, with the changed condition number 4, and informatives 1 to 4, as set out on page 161 to 164 of the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour?
It's all in favour.
So that there are no items to consider in exempt, that does conclude this meeting. Thank you very much, members, for your interesting debates.